The screech of metal against concrete echoed through the underground facility as Dr. Serafina Blackthorne pressed her palm against the reinforced observation window. Beyond the thick glass, shadows moved with an intelligence that chilled her to the bone. These weren't the mindless shambling corpses from the early days of the outbreak. These creatures moved with purpose, their decaying fingers tracing patterns along the facility's outer walls as if mapping every weakness, every potential entry point. "They're learning," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. Behind her, the soft hum of computers and the distant murmur of her team's voices filled the command center. 6 months ago, they had believed this facility to be impregnable, buried 300 feet beneath the Montana mountains with enough supplies to last a decade. Now, watching the undead probe their defenses with methodical precision, Serafina realized they might not survive the week. Commander Zephyr Voss approached with measured steps, his weathered face bearing the weight of too many lost battles. His steel-gray eyes reflected the same grim understanding that had settled in Serafina's stomach like a stone. "The perimeter sensors are picking up organized movement patterns," he reported, his voice carrying the controlled tension of a man accustomed to delivering bad news. "They're not just wandering anymore, document. They're coordinating." Across the room, Kieran Ashworth's fingers flew across multiple keyboards, his youthful face illuminated by the blue glow of countless monitors. His auburn hair fell across his forehead as he hunched over his workstation, completely absorbed in the data streaming across his screens. "The electromagnetic signatures are unlike anything we've recorded before," he called out without looking up. "Their brain activity is spiking in synchronized waves. It's almost like they're networked." Lydia Ravencrest emerged from the adjacent laboratory, stripping off her latex gloves with practiced efficiency. Her dark skin glistened with perspiration, and her usually immaculate lab coat bore stains from hours of intensive research. "The tissue samples we recovered from the last breach are showing unprecedented neural regeneration," she announced, setting down a sealed container with careful precision. "Whatever's driving their evolution, it's accelerating." The facility's lights flickered momentarily, drawing everyone's attention to the ceiling. Tobias Meridian's voice crackled through the intercom from the engineering bay, his distinctive accent carrying a note of urgency. "Power grid's holding steady, but something's interfering with our external sensors. The bloody things are learning to jam our equipment." Serafina turned from the window to face her team, the weight of leadership settling heavily on her shoulders. Each of these brilliant minds had been handpicked for this project, originally designed to study the zombie outbreak's origins and develop countermeasures. Now they found themselves trapped in their own sanctuary, facing an enemy that defied every assumption they had made about the undead. Anya Silvermoon looked up from her psychological assessment charts, her silver hair catching the artificial light. Her pale blue eyes held a mixture of fascination and fear as she spoke. "I've been analyzing their behavioral patterns for weeks. They're not just evolving physically. They're developing tactical awareness, emotional responses, even what appears to be curiosity. This isn't random mutation anymore." The observation deck fell silent except for the steady thrum of life support systems. Through the reinforced walls, they could hear the scraping and tapping of countless hands testing their defenses. The sound had become a constant presence over the past month, a rhythmic reminder that they were no longer the apex predators they once believed themselves to be. "How long do we have?" Zephyr asked, his military training demanding concrete assessments even in the face of the impossible. Serafina glanced at the readouts on her tablet, calculating power consumption, food stores, and ammunition reserves against the increasing pressure from above. "If they maintain their current rate of learning, they'll find a way in within 72 hours. Maybe less." Kieran finally looked up from his screens, his young face bearing an expression far too serious for his 26 years. "There's something else. I've been monitoring global communications, what's left of them anyway. Similar facilities across the world have gone dark in the past week. All of them reported the same thing before contact was lost. Organized zombie behavior. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. They weren't facing an isolated incident or a local mutation. This was a global phenomenon, and if other facilities had already fallen, then humanity's last bastions of scientific knowledge were being systematically eliminated. "Then we have work to do," Serafina said, her voice carrying a determination that surprised even herself. "If we're going to die down here, we're going to make sure our deaths mean something. We're going to figure out how they're doing this, and we're going to find a way to stop them." The emergency meeting convened in the facility's central conference room, a sterile space that had once hosted mundane discussions about research protocols and budget allocations. Now it served as a war room where humanity's brightest minds grappled with an enemy that challenged every scientific principle they held sacred. Serafina stood at the head of the table, her usually pristine appearance showing signs of the sleepless nights that had become routine. "Show them what you found, Kieran," she said, gesturing toward the large display screen that dominated one wall. The young programmer's fingers danced across his tablet, and the screen came alive with a complex network diagram. Pulsing nodes connected by shifting lines created a web of activity that seemed to breathe with malevolent life. "This is a visualization of the electromagnetic patterns we've detected from the zombie masses above," he explained, his voice steady despite the exhaustion evident in his eyes. "Each node represents a cluster of undead, and these connections show how they're communicating." Zephyr leaned forward, his tactical mind immediately grasping the implications. "You're telling me they've developed some kind of hive mind?" "Not exactly," Lydia interjected, pulling up her own research on a secondary screen. "The neural pathways I've observed in the samples suggest something more sophisticated. They're retaining individual consciousness while sharing collective knowledge. Imagine a library where every book can instantly access information from every other book." Anya tapped her stylus against her lips, a habit that had intensified during their confinement. "From a psychological standpoint, this explains the coordinated behaviors we've observed. They're not just following instinct anymore. They're problem-solving, adapting their strategies based on what they learn from each encounter." The room fell silent as the weight of this revelation settled over them. Tobias's voice broke through the quiet, transmitted from the engineering section where he monitored their defenses. "The structural integrity sensors are picking up systematic testing along our weak points. They've identified every potential breach location and are applying pressure in a calculated sequence." Serafina pulled up the facility's blueprints, overlaying them with the zombie activity patterns. The correlation was unmistakable. The undead weren't randomly probing their defenses, they were conducting a methodical engineering assessment of the complex. "They're learning our architecture faster than we learned theirs," she observed grimly. "There's more," Kieran continued, switching to a new data set. "I've been analyzing the evolution rate of their communication patterns. The complexity is increasing exponentially. What took them a week to learn a month ago, they're now mastering in hours." Lydia stood and moved to the display, pointing to specific clusters in the network diagram. "The biochemical changes support this acceleration. The virus isn't just reanimating dead tissue anymore. It's optimizing it, enhancing neural connectivity beyond what living human brains can achieve. They're becoming something entirely new." The implications crashed over them like a cold wave. They weren't just fighting zombies anymore, they were confronting a new form of life that was rapidly surpassing human capabilities. Every advantage humanity had once possessed through intelligence and technology was being systematically eroded by an enemy that learned from every mistake, every defensive measure, every tactical decision. Zephyr's military experience provided a grim assessment. "In conventional warfare, we'd call this an adaptive adversary. The problem is, our strategies assume the enemy has limitations. These things are removing their limitations in real time." Anya pulled up psychological profiles of the team members, her expression thoughtful. "We need to consider that they might be learning from us specifically. Our patterns, our decision-making processes, our weaknesses. If they can observe and analyze our behavior as effectively as we've been analyzing theirs, then we're at a severe disadvantage." The observation struck everyone with its terrifying logic. Through the monitoring systems they had used to study the zombies, the creatures might have been studying them in return. Every strategic discussion, every defensive preparation, every moment of weakness could have been catalogued and analyzed by an intelligence that never tired, never forgot, and never stopped learning. "We need to change our approach entirely," Serafina declared, her scientific mind already working through possibilities. "Traditional defensive strategies won't work against an enemy that adapts faster than we can react. We need to think differently, act unpredictably, force them to respond to us instead of the other way around." Tobias's voice crackled through the intercom again, carrying a new note of urgency. "I'm detecting unusual activity in the lower access tunnels. They've found the maintenance shafts." The room erupted into focused activity as everyone accessed their stations remotely. The zombies hadn't just been testing the main defenses, they had been conducting a comprehensive survey of the entire facility. While the team had been congratulating themselves on their impregnable bunker, their enemies had been quietly mapping every ventilation duct, every service corridor, every potential weakness that the original designers had never intended to be defensive considerations. "How long do we have?" Zephyr asked, already mentally calculating defensive positions and ammunition requirements. Kieran's analysis appeared on screen almost instantly. Based on their current rate of progress and adaptation, they'll breach the outer maintenance barriers within 18 hours. Once they're in the service areas, they'll have multiple vectors of attack. The timer had accelerated beyond their worst projections. What had been a 72-hour crisis was now compressed into less than a day. But as Serafina looked around the room at her team, she saw something that surprised her. Instead of despair, she saw determination. Instead of panic, she saw focus. They were brilliant minds pushed to their absolute limits, and sometimes that was exactly when breakthrough innovations occurred. "Then we have 18 hours to do something impossible," she said, her voice carrying a quiet confidence that steadied everyone in the room. "We're going to outthink them." The first breach came at dawn, though the concept of day and night had become abstract in their underground world. Tobias's voice echoed through the facility's communication system with controlled urgency as alarms bathed the corridors in pulsing red light. "They've compromised maintenance shaft 7. Multiple contacts moving through the ventilation system." Serafina raced through the corridors toward the primary defense station, her mind calculating possibilities with each step. Behind her, Kieran struggled to keep pace while carrying portable monitoring equipment, his young legs adapting to the urgent rhythm that had become their new reality. The facility that had once felt spacious and secure now seemed to contract around them, each hallway a potential ambush point, each intersection a tactical decision. Zephyr had already positioned himself at the choke point where the maintenance shaft connected to the main facility. His weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency as he checked his weapon systems and activated the emergency barriers. Years of military experience had taught him that the first moments of contact would determine the outcome of any engagement, but nothing in his training had prepared him for an enemy that learned from every encounter. "Visual contact," he reported through his headset as shapes moved through the emergency lighting. "They're not rushing blindly anymore. Systematic advance, testing each barrier before proceeding." Through the security monitors, the team watched in horrified fascination as the zombies demonstrated tactical awareness that defied every assumption about undead behavior. Instead of the frenzied assault they had expected, the creatures moved with deliberate precision, some falling back to allow others to probe defenses, others taking positions that suggested they understood concepts like cover and crossfire. Lydia observed from the biochemical analysis station, her instruments detecting the electromagnetic signatures that had become the zombies' calling card. The neural activity spikes are intensifying. They're not just learning from what they encounter directly. They're sharing tactical information in real time. Anya monitored the psychological aspects of the breach, her screens displaying behavioral analysis algorithms that she had developed to understand human crowd dynamics. Now those same tools revealed disturbing patterns in zombie group behavior. They're exhibiting leadership hierarchies. Some individuals are making strategic decisions while others follow complex coordinated instructions. The first emergency barrier exploded inward with tremendous force, metal debris clattering across the corridor floor. But instead of pouring through the opening, the zombies paused, allowing several of their number to advance cautiously while others remained in defensive positions. They had learned caution from previous encounters, understanding that rushing into unknown territory resulted in unnecessary losses. "They're preserving their forces," Zephyr observed with grudging professional respect. "These aren't just mindless predators anymore. They understand resource management." Tobias's engineering expertise proved crucial as he activated secondary defensive measures that the zombies hadn't yet encountered. Hidden panels slid open to reveal automated defense turrets, their targeting systems locking onto the advancing undead. But even as the weapons engaged, the zombies demonstrated their enhanced learning capabilities by immediately adapting their movement patterns to minimize exposure. "They're analyzing our defensive systems in real time," Kieran reported, his instruments tracking the electromagnetic patterns that indicated active zombie communication. "Each engagement is making them more effective against our countermeasures." The realization struck the team with devastating clarity. Every defensive measure they employed was teaching their enemies how to overcome similar obstacles more effectively. Their own security systems were becoming training exercises for an adversary that never forgot and constantly improved. Serafina made a command decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation. "Shut down the automated defenses. We're making them stronger." "Doc, that's crazy," Zephyr protested, even as he continued to engage targets with conventional weapons. "Without the automated systems, we'll be overwhelmed in minutes." "We'll be overwhelmed anyway if we keep teaching them how to defeat our technology," she replied, her scientific mind overriding emotional responses. "Every second those systems operate, they're learning countermeasures that they'll use against other survivors." The decision required a leap of faith that challenged everyone's survival instincts, but the logic was undeniable. The automated defenses represented humanity's technological advantage, but they were becoming liability against an enemy that adapted faster than new systems could be developed. As the defensive turrets powered down, the zombie advance accelerated with frightening speed. They had learned to recognize the threat signatures of automated weapons and immediately capitalized on their absence. But something unexpected happened in those critical moments. Without the predictable patterns of automated responses, the zombies faced human unpredictability for the first time since their evolution had begun. Zephyr's military training adapted to the new parameters with remarkable speed. Instead of relying on predetermined defensive positions, he began moving unpredictably, using the facility's layout in ways that no programmed system would consider. His random tactical decisions created situations that the zombies' enhanced intelligence couldn't immediately analyze and counter. "They're slowing down," Anya observed through her behavioral monitoring systems. "Uncertainty is affecting their decision-making processes." For the first time since the zombies had begun their coordinated assault, the human defenders had introduced an element that couldn't be easily learned or predicted. Individual human creativity and irrationality were proving to be effective countermeasures against collective zombie intelligence. But the respite was temporary. Through the monitoring systems, they could see more zombies massing in the compromised areas, their numbers growing as they called reinforcements through their mysterious communication network. The first breach had been contained, but it was merely a reconnaissance in force. The real assault was yet to come. "We bought ourselves time," Serafina announced to her team as emergency repairs began on the damaged barriers. "Now we need to figure out how to use human unpredictability as a weapon." In the depths of the facility's most secure laboratory, Lydia worked with feverish intensity over tissue samples that defied every principle of biochemistry she had spent her career mastering. The zombie specimens writhed with unnatural vitality under her microscope, their cellular structure adapting and reorganizing even in isolation from the host organism. Each sample taught her something new about their enemy, but the knowledge came with the terrifying realization that she was studying life forms that were rapidly surpassing human biological limitations. "The neural pathways are unlike anything in known biology," she reported to the team through the laboratory's communication system. They've developed quantum entanglement at the cellular level. That's how they're maintaining instantaneous communication across vast distances. Serafina absorbed this information while coordinating the facility's defensive preparations from the command center. The implications of quantum biological communication were staggering. The zombies weren't just sharing information through electromagnetic signals, they were operating as a truly unified consciousness that transcended physical proximity. Every zombie was simultaneously individual and collective, capable of independent action while remaining connected to the greater whole. Kieran had spent the previous 18 hours developing new analytical tools to understand the quantum signatures that Lydia had discovered. His young mind proved remarkably adaptable to concepts that challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness and identity. If they're using quantum entanglement for communication, then traditional jamming techniques won't work. We need to think about disrupting the quantum field itself. Tobias approached the engineering challenges with characteristic determination, his hands already deep in the facility's power distribution systems. Quantum field disruption would require enormous amounts of energy. We'd need to overload our entire power grid and hope the resulting electromagnetic pulse affects their quantum states without destroying our own systems. The plan that emerged from their collaborative analysis was desperate and dangerous, but it represented their best chance of disrupting the zombie coordination network. By converting their facility's nuclear power plant into a massive electromagnetic pulse generator, they could potentially sever the quantum connections that made the zombie collective possible. Anya provided crucial insights into the psychological implications of their strategy. If we can disrupt their network communication, they'll likely revert to individual consciousness. That could create confusion, panic, even infighting among their ranks. Individual zombies are far less threatening than coordinated masses. Zephyr reviewed the tactical aspects of their plan with professional skepticism. The electromagnetic pulse will also disable all of our electronic systems. We'll be fighting blind, with no communications, no monitoring, and no automated defenses. If the plan doesn't work perfectly, we'll be completely helpless. The stark assessment forced everyone to confront the reality of their situation. They were proposing to deliberately cripple their own defensive capabilities in a desperate gamble to disrupt their enemy's advantages. Success would level the playing field between human creativity and zombie collective intelligence. Failure would result in their complete annihilation. There's another consideration, Lydia added from her laboratory. The quantum entanglement might not be limited to communication. If their cellular regeneration is also quantum-based, then disrupting the field could cause massive biological instability. They might simply dissolve. The possibility of actually killing the zombies through quantum disruption added a new dimension to their desperate plan. Instead of merely disrupting their coordination, they might be able to eliminate the threat entirely. But the energy requirements were enormous, and the risk of destroying their own facility was significant. Serafina gathered her team in the command center for what they all understood might be their final strategic meeting. Each person represented humanity's best hope for survival, and their combined intelligence had produced a plan that was either brilliant or suicidal. Perhaps both. The quantum pulse device will take 6 hours to construct and charge, Tobias reported, his engineering calculations displayed across multiple screens. We'll need to channel the entire output of the nuclear reactor through modified electromagnetic coils. The stress on the facility's infrastructure will be enormous. Kieran had developed monitoring protocols that would allow them to track the pulse's effectiveness during the brief moments before their electronic systems failed. We'll have approximately 30 seconds of sensor data after activation. That should be enough to determine if the quantum disruption is working. Anya outlined the human factors that would determine their survival if the plan succeeded. Without electronic communications, we'll need to rely on direct verbal contact and predetermined signals. Everyone needs to understand their role and be prepared to act independently. Zephyr provided the military perspective that grounded their scientific theorizing in tactical reality. If the zombies don't immediately collapse when we activate the pulse, we'll be facing thousands of angry undead with no technological advantages. Hand-to-hand combat against overwhelming numbers. The weight of their decision settled over the room like a physical presence. They were about to gamble everything on a scientific theory that had never been tested, using equipment that had never been designed for their intended purpose, against an enemy that continuously evolved beyond their understanding. "Are we in agreement?" Serafina asked, looking at each member of her team. Their faces reflected the same mixture of determination and terror that she felt in her own heart. They were brilliant scientists and military professionals, but they were also human beings facing the possible extinction of their species. One by one, each team member voiced their agreement. Lydia would continue monitoring biological effects until the last possible moment. Kieran would track the quantum signatures and communication patterns. Tobias would manage the engineering aspects of the pulse device. Anya would coordinate human behavioral responses during the chaos that would follow. Zephyr would command their physical defenses if the plan failed. As they dispersed to begin their preparations, none of them spoke aloud the thought that haunted each of their minds. In 6 hours, they would either save humanity or die in the attempt. There would be no middle ground, no partial success, no opportunity for revision or improvement. The next 6 hours would test everything they understood about science, teamwork, and the human capacity for innovation under impossible pressure. The facility hummed with desperate energy as Tobias worked to convert their nuclear reactor into humanity's most ambitious weapon. His engineering expertise had never been tested under such extreme conditions, but the mathematics were elegant in their simplicity even as the execution proved fiendishly complex. Miles of superconducting cable snaked through corridors that had never been designed to accommodate such modifications, each connection representing a critical point of potential failure. "Power coupling efficiency is at 87%, he reported through the facility's intercom system, his voice steady despite the magnitude of their undertaking. "The quantum field generators are responding within acceptable parameters, but we're pushing every system beyond its design specifications." Serafina monitored the overall coordination from the command center, her scientific mind tracking dozens of variables simultaneously while her human heart grappled with the weight of their decision. Through the reinforced windows, she could see the zombie masses growing larger and more organized, their movements displaying an intelligence that seemed to increase with each passing hour. Lydia had made a disturbing discovery in her biological analysis laboratory. "The tissue samples are showing accelerated adaptation to electromagnetic exposure," she announced, her voice carrying a note of scientific fascination mixed with existential dread. "They're developing resistance to our standard monitoring equipment. It's as if they know we're preparing something." The implications sent a chill through the entire team. If the zombies could sense their electromagnetic preparations and adapt accordingly, then their quantum pulse weapon might prove ineffective before it could be deployed. The race between human innovation and zombie evolution had become a countdown to a moment that would determine the fate of both species. Kieran's monitoring systems revealed the scope of their enemy's intelligence in terrifying detail. The communication patterns are shifting to higher frequency bands. They're not just adapting to our defenses, they're actively changing their operational parameters to counter whatever they think we're planning. Anya studied the behavioral implications from her psychological analysis station, her instruments tracking patterns of zombie movement that suggested strategic thinking far beyond anything they had previously observed. They're demonstrating anticipatory behavior. They know something is coming, and they're positioning themselves accordingly. The realization that their enemies possessed not just intelligence but intuition forced the team to reconsider their entire approach. The zombies weren't just reacting to human actions, they were predicting and preparing for human strategies. The quantum entanglement that connected them had created a collective consciousness that operated on multiple levels of awareness simultaneously. Zephyr coordinated the physical security preparations with grim efficiency, knowing that their quantum pulse weapon represented both their greatest hope and their greatest vulnerability. "If this thing doesn't work perfectly, we'll be completely exposed. No power, no communications, no electronic defenses of any kind." The military commander's assessment highlighted the all-or-nothing nature of their gamble. Success would potentially eliminate the zombie threat entirely, but failure would leave them helpless against an enemy that had already demonstrated the ability to overwhelm conventional defenses. There would be no second chances, no opportunity to retreat and regroup. As the countdown to activation continued, each team member faced the probability that they were living through their final hours. The facility that had been their sanctuary was being transformed into either humanity's salvation or their tomb. Every modification, every adjustment, every calibration brought them closer to a moment that would define the future of human civilization. Quantum field coherence is approaching critical threshold, Tobias announced, his voice betraying the strain of maintaining focus under impossible pressure. We're 15 minutes from optimal charge levels. Serafina initiated the final preparation protocols, her hands moving with practiced efficiency across control interfaces that would soon be rendered useless by their own desperate strategy. All non-essential systems are shutting down. Emergency power reserves are being channeled to the quantum generators. The facility began its transformation from advanced research complex to primitive survival bunker. Lights dimmed to emergency levels, air circulation systems reduced to minimum operation, and computer systems initiated shutdown sequences that would preserve critical data in hardened storage units. They were deliberately regressing to a technological level that their ancestors would have recognized. Lydia sealed her laboratory samples in quantum-shielded containers, hoping to preserve evidence of their discoveries for whatever survivors might eventually find the facility. Biological monitoring is complete. The tissue samples confirm that quantum disruption should destabilize their cellular matrix at the molecular level. Kieran completed his final analysis of zombie communication patterns, his data representing humanity's most comprehensive understanding of their enemies' capabilities. Network activity is spiking across all monitored frequencies. They know something's about to happen. Anya documented the psychological profiles of both human and zombie behavior patterns, creating a record that might help future survivors understand the intelligence they were facing. The behavioral data suggests they're experiencing something analogous to anxiety. They have enough consciousness to fear the unknown. The recognition that their enemies possessed emotions as well as intelligence added a disturbing dimension to their conflict. The zombies weren't just mindless predators or even cold calculating machines. They were conscious beings experiencing fear, uncertainty, and possibly even hope for their own survival. 5 minutes to activation, Tobias announced, his engineering systems pushing the nuclear reactor to its absolute limits. All personnel should assume emergency positions. After activation, we'll be operating in complete electronic darkness. The team moved to their predetermined stations, each person carrying only essential equipment that would function in the electromagnetic chaos that would follow the pulse activation. They had rehearsed these procedures dozens of times, but the reality of facing an unknown enemy without technological support challenged every assumption about modern warfare. Quantum field generation is optimal, Serafina announced, her finger hovering over the activation control. This is our moment. For humanity. The quantum pulse erupted through the facility with the force of a controlled supernova, electromagnetic energy cascading through modified coils that channeled the power of their nuclear reactor into a weapon that existed at the intersection of theoretical physics and desperate necessity. For a moment that lasted an eternity, the air itself seemed to vibrate with invisible force as quantum fields collapsed and reformed throughout the underground complex. Serafina felt the pulse as a physical sensation, a tingling that penetrated every cell of her body as reality itself shifted around them. The command center's displays flickered and died, emergency lighting failed, and the familiar hum of life support systems faded into a silence that was both peaceful and terrifying. They had succeeded in creating their electromagnetic weapon, but now they waited in darkness to discover whether they had saved themselves or merely ensured their deaths would be more dramatic. Through the reinforced windows, illuminated only by chemical emergency lights, they watched the zombie masses respond to the quantum disruption with reactions that defied every expectation they had formed about undead behavior. Instead of collapsing or dissolving as Lydia's biological models had predicted, the creatures began exhibiting signs of confusion and disorientation that were disturbingly human in their manifestation. "They're not dying," Zephyr observed through the darkness, his military training allowing him to assess the situation even without electronic monitoring systems. But they're not coordinating anymore either. Look at their movement patterns. The organized formations that had characterized zombie behavior for months were dissolving into chaotic individual actions. Creatures that had moved with unified purpose now wandered aimlessly, bumping into each other, changing directions randomly, displaying all the signs of beings who had suddenly lost their connection to a collective consciousness they had never known they possessed. Anya watched their behavior with professional fascination even as she grappled with the implications for their survival. They're experiencing something like psychological trauma. The sudden isolation from their network consciousness is causing what we might call an identity crisis. Kieran worked with portable monitoring equipment that had been shielded from the electromagnetic pulse, his instruments detecting the absence of the quantum signatures that had defined zombie coordination. The entanglement field has been completely disrupted. They're operating as individuals for the first time since their evolution began. The success of their quantum weapon proved to be more complex than simple victory or defeat. The zombies remained physically dangerous, but their collective intelligence had been shattered. Instead of facing a unified army commanded by a hive mind, they were now dealing with thousands of confused individuals who had lost their primary method of coordination and communication. Tobias monitored the facility's systems through mechanical gauges and analog instruments that had survived the electromagnetic chaos. Structural integrity is holding, but we've lost all automated defenses and environmental controls. We're running on emergency power reserves that will last approximately 6 hours. The team found themselves in a post-technological environment where their scientific expertise had to be applied through direct observation and manual calculation. Computer models and electronic monitoring had been replaced by human senses and intuition, forcing them to confront their enemy through the same methods their ancestors had used against dangerous predators. Lydia ventured into her laboratory using portable chemical analysis equipment, discovering that the biological samples had indeed been affected by the quantum disruption. The cellular matrix is destabilizing, but slowly. The zombies aren't going to simply dissolve, but their regenerative capabilities have been severely compromised. The revelation provided hope for long-term survival even if immediate victory remained elusive. The zombies' enhanced healing and adaptation abilities depended on the same quantum processes that had enabled their network communication. By disrupting one capability, they had accidentally damaged the other. Through the observation windows, they could see individual zombies beginning to succumb to injuries and decay that their enhanced biology had previously been able to repair instantly. The quantum pulse hadn't killed them immediately, but it had restored their vulnerability to conventional damage and natural decomposition. "They're becoming mortal again," Serafina observed with something approaching wonder. The quantum disruption didn't just break their network. It restored natural biological limitations. Zephyr recognized the tactical implications immediately. Individual zombies operating under normal biological constraints are a manageable threat. We can engage them using conventional weapons and tactics. But even as hope began to emerge from their desperate gamble, new challenges became apparent. The facility's life support systems depended on electronic controls that had been destroyed by their own weapon. They had traded the threat of intelligent zombies for the certainty of environmental system failure. Oxygen levels are declining, Tobias reported through manual atmospheric monitoring. Without electronic circulation controls, we have perhaps 12 hours of breathable air remaining in the sealed sections. The team faced a cruel irony. Their quantum weapon had succeeded beyond their most optimistic projections, potentially eliminating the zombie threat entirely, but the same electromagnetic pulse that had saved them from their enemies was slowly killing them through system failures. Anya assessed their psychological state with professional detachment, recognizing the signs of stress and exhaustion that threatened their ability to make rational decisions. "We need to focus on immediate survival priorities. The zombie threat may be neutralized, but we're still trapped underground with failing life support." The reality of their situation demanded immediate action despite their physical and emotional exhaustion. They had won a battle against impossible odds, but survival required solving a completely different set of challenges. Engineering expertise would need to restore basic life support, while tactical planning focused on reaching the surface through potentially zombie-infested territory. "We have work to do," Serafina announced, her voice carrying the quiet determination that had sustained them through their darkest hours. "We've proven that human intelligence can overcome any challenge. Now we prove that human teamwork can get us home." The ascent through the facility's emergency evacuation routes became a journey through the wreckage of their former sanctuary, each level telling the story of their desperate battle against an enemy that had challenged every assumption about survival and intelligence. Tobias led the way with mechanical expertise that had proven invaluable since electronic systems failed, his hands working emergency manual releases and backup mechanisms that most people had forgotten existed. "Emergency shaft 3 is clear to level 2, he reported through the darkness, his voice echoing in the confined space. "But the blast doors between levels are sealed. We'll need to route through the secondary maintenance corridors." Serafina followed close behind, carrying precious data storage devices that contained their research findings and the theoretical framework for the quantum pulse weapon. The information represented humanity's hard-won understanding of an enemy that might evolve again, and she was determined to preserve that knowledge for whatever survivors remained in the outside world. Kieran struggled with portable computer equipment that he had managed to shield from the electromagnetic pulse, his young determination driving him to maintain some connection to the digital world that had been his primary environment. "I'm detecting residual electromagnetic signatures from the surface. There are still electronic systems functioning up there." The possibility of reaching a world where technology still functioned provided motivation that sustained them through the physical challenges of climbing emergency ladders and navigating corridors that had never been designed for evacuation under combat conditions. But each level they ascended brought them closer to unknown dangers on the surface. Anya monitored the psychological state of the team with professional concern, recognizing the signs of stress and exhaustion that threatened their ability to make critical decisions. "We need to pace ourselves. Fatigue-induced errors could be fatal when we reach the surface." Zephyr coordinated their tactical movement with military precision, his experience with hostile environments providing essential guidance as they approached areas where zombies might still pose a threat. "Surface reconnaissance will be critical. We don't know how the quantum pulse affected zombies outside the facility's immediate area." Lydia carried biological samples and analysis equipment that would allow her to continue studying zombie physiology in whatever laboratory facilities they might find on the surface. Her research had provided the key insights that made their quantum weapon possible, and she was determined to continue developing countermeasures against future zombie evolution. The emergency evacuation route brought them to a sealed blast door that represented the final barrier between their underground sanctuary and the outside world. Tobias worked the manual release mechanisms with careful precision, knowing that opening the door would expose them to whatever remained of the surface environment. "Air pressure is equalizing," he announced as ancient hydraulic systems responded to his mechanical expertise. "Atmospheric composition appears normal, but we won't know about contamination until we can run chemical analysis." The blast door opened with a grinding sound that seemed unnaturally loud after the muffled acoustics of their underground facility. Beyond lay a concrete stairwell that led to the surface installation that had once served as camouflage for their research complex. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows that transformed familiar architecture into an alien landscape. Their first encounter with post-pulse zombies confirmed their hopes and fears simultaneously. Individual undead wandered aimlessly through the surface facility, their movements displaying none of the coordinated intelligence that had made them such formidable enemies. But they remained physically dangerous, their enhanced strength and aggressive instincts unaffected by the quantum disruption. "Single targets, no coordination," Zephyr observed as he engaged the nearest zombie with conventional weapons. "They're operating on basic predatory instincts. Dangerous but manageable." The team established a defensive perimeter around the facility's main exit while conducting quick reconnaissance of their immediate surroundings. The landscape beyond the installation showed signs of massive zombie presence, but the organized formations had dissolved into scattered individuals who posed no collective threat. Anya documented their observations with scientific precision, her training allowing her to maintain professional objectivity even in the face of humanity's near extinction. The psychological profiles suggest complete loss of higher cognitive functions. They've retained motor skills and aggressive responses, but complex reasoning appears to be eliminated. Kieran managed to establish limited electronic communications using equipment that had been shielded from the quantum pulse, his instruments detecting radio signals from distant human settlements. I'm picking up emergency broadcasts from several locations. Other survivors are reporting similar breakdowns in zombie coordination. The confirmation that their quantum pulse had affected zombie populations across a wide area provided validation for their desperate strategy. They had succeeded in breaking the network consciousness that had made the undead such an existential threat to human survival. But the cost had been enormous, and the long-term implications remained uncertain. Lydia conducted field analysis of zombie tissue samples using portable equipment, her biological expertise revealing the ongoing effects of quantum disruption on undead physiology. Cellular degradation is accelerating. Without their enhanced regenerative capabilities, they're returning to normal decomposition rates. The scientific assessment suggested that the remaining zombies would eventually succumb to natural biological processes, but the timeline for complete elimination remained unclear. Individual zombies might pose local threats for months or even years, but the species-level extinction event had been averted. Tobias worked to establish emergency power for their essential equipment using generators that had survived the electromagnetic pulse, his engineering skills proving crucial for maintaining the technology they would need for long-term survival. We can power basic communications and analysis equipment, but we'll need to find better facilities for comprehensive research. As the team prepared to leave their underground sanctuary permanently, each member grappled with the realization that they were among the few humans who had witnessed and survived humanity's closest approach to extinction. Their actions had changed the course of human history, but the full consequences of their intervention would take years to understand. "We did something unprecedented," Serafina announced to her team as they prepared for their journey to find other survivors. "We proved that human intelligence and cooperation can overcome any threat. But our work isn't finished." 6 months after the quantum pulse that had shattered the zombie network consciousness, Dr. Serafina Blackthorne stood in the rebuilt laboratory of the Northern Alliance survivor colony, analyzing data that told the story of humanity's gradual recovery from near extinction. The facility buzzed with activity as scientists from around the world collaborated to understand the long-term implications of their victory against an enemy that had evolved beyond every biological precedent. The reports arriving from survivor settlements painted a picture of cautious optimism mixed with persistent vigilance. Individual zombies continued to pose local threats in scattered areas, but their numbers declined steadily as natural decomposition overcame their compromised regenerative abilities. More importantly, no new cases of coordinated zombie intelligence had been reported anywhere on the planet. Kieran had established a global communication network that connected survivor colonies across multiple continents, his technological expertise proving invaluable in rebuilding the electronic infrastructure that humanity needed for long-term recovery. Population surveys indicate that approximately 12% of the human race survived the zombie outbreak, he reported during their weekly briefing. Recovery rates vary significantly based on geographic location and resource availability. The statistics represented both tragedy and hope. Billions of people had died during the zombie pandemic, but the surviving populations were distributed widely enough to ensure species survival. The genetic diversity and technological knowledge preserved in various survivor colonies provided the foundation for rebuilding human civilization. Lydia continued her biological research using samples collected from around the world, her work focusing on developing preventive measures against future evolutionary developments. The virus that created the zombie pandemic has been completely neutralized by quantum field disruption, she announced with scientific satisfaction. But we need to remain vigilant against mutation or reintroduction. Zephyr had transitioned from military defense to reconstruction coordination, his tactical expertise proving valuable in organizing supply lines and security arrangements between survivor settlements. The psychological adaptation has been remarkable. Communities that survived the zombie crisis are demonstrating unprecedented levels of cooperation and innovation. Anya's psychological studies revealed that the shared trauma of near extinction had created lasting changes in human behavior patterns. Post-crisis societies are showing reduced aggression, increased collaborative decision-making, and enhanced appreciation for scientific knowledge. The experience has fundamentally altered human social dynamics. Tobias had become instrumental in developing the infrastructure technologies that would support humanity's recovery, his engineering innovations addressing the challenges of rebuilding industrial capacity with severely reduced populations. Automated manufacturing systems are compensating for labor shortages, but we're still decades away from pre-crisis technological capabilities. The team that had saved humanity found themselves grappling with the complexities of managing their own legacy. Their quantum pulse weapon had broken the zombie network, but it had also demonstrated the potential for quantum consciousness technologies that could revolutionize human capability. The ethical implications of such power weighed heavily on their decisions about future research directions. "We proved that consciousness can be networked through quantum entanglement," Serafina observed during a private meeting with her core team. "The question is whether humanity should pursue similar enhancements or maintain individual consciousness as our defining characteristic." The philosophical implications of their discovery extended far beyond immediate survival concerns. They had learned that consciousness itself could be modified, expanded, and networked through quantum physics. The zombies had achieved collective intelligence through accident and virus. Humans might choose to develop similar capabilities through deliberate scientific advancement. Kieran's analysis of the communication patterns they had observed suggested that human quantum networking could provide enormous advantages in problem-solving, coordination, and innovation. Imagine the scientific breakthroughs possible if every human brain could access collective knowledge instantaneously. We could solve problems that would take isolated individuals centuries to address. But Anya's psychological research revealed significant concerns about individual identity and personal autonomy in networked consciousness systems. The zombies lost their individual personalities when they joined the collective. Human quantum networking would need to preserve personal identity while enabling collective capability. Lydia's biological studies indicated that human physiology might be more compatible with quantum consciousness than zombie tissue had been. Human neural pathways could potentially support quantum entanglement without the cellular degradation that affected the undead. But the modifications would be irreversible. Zephyr provided the tactical perspective that grounded their theoretical discussions in practical reality. Any human who developed quantum networking capabilities would become either humanity's greatest asset or its greatest threat. The power to coordinate consciousness could be used for good or evil. Tobias considered the engineering challenges of developing human quantum enhancement technologies while ensuring safeguards against misuse. We could build quantum consciousness systems with built-in limitations and ethical controls. But any technology can be modified or misused by determined individuals. As evening approached over the survivor colony, Serafina stood again at an observation window, watching human beings work together to rebuild their civilization. The view was different from her underground facility, but the sense of responsibility remained unchanged. They had prevented humanity's extinction, but they had also discovered knowledge that could transform human nature itself. The choice facing her team was profound. They could preserve the secret of quantum consciousness, ensuring that humanity remained individual and autonomous but limited by the constraints of isolated minds. Or they could develop the technology that might enable human collective intelligence, with all the benefits and risks that such power would entail. "We saved humanity from extinction," she whispered to herself as stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Now we have to decide what humanity becomes next." Her team had proven that human intelligence and cooperation could overcome any challenge. The question that would define their legacy was whether humanity should remain human or evolve into something unprecedented. The answer would determine the future of consciousness itself. In the distance, the lights of the survivor colony twinkled like stars, each one representing a human mind working independently toward collective survival. For now, that was enough. But someday, humanity would need to choose between individual consciousness and collective transcendence. The ultimate test had ended. The ultimate choice was just beginning.